Lieutenant Governor obviously wanted to get some things off his chest there. So, and that's one thing I love about this show is we really have the freedom to expand and go in depth in these conversations. I mean, yeah, they're conversations, but at the end of the day, most of the conversations we have on this show are news. You know what I mean? But we're able to discuss these issues, events, happenings in a more, I mean, it's a kind of a casual format, right? Because we're just talking back and forth, but there's definitely some weight and depth behind the things that you hear on the link. It's 9:36. Let's go to the KUAM News Zoom room where we have Superintendent of Catholic Schools, Dr. Juan Flores, standing by. Progress report, Doc. First day of face-to-face learning. We'll just get right into it. So on the public school side, we are hearing just anecdotally, and well, from Superintendent John as well, that 2 kids in a single class, 3 kids riding the bus for Simon Sanchez. So the turnout, I don't want to say not what we expected because they did the surveys and all, but just I think a lot of people had in our minds, just because it's the way it's always been, when you say the words back to school, it conjures a lot of imagery in our imaginations about kids, tons of kids getting down, high five and hug, great, haven't seen you, what'd you do in the summer type of thing. But this is just not how this back to school has happened. So how'd it go for the private schools on your side, Doc?
I think at the Catholic schools, for those schools that did start face-to-face instruction yesterday, it was back to school. The only school that recorded maybe a concern in return is that they had only 50% of their students returned, but we have some schools reporting as many as 90% of the students coming back, which means the schools will only have to deal with 10% of the kids not being back in school. But for the vast majority of our schools, there were kids all over the place. We did have some students who rode the bus, but very few yesterday. But buses were available from DPW, schedules went out. But the kids were in school and they were, keeping social distance, wearing their masks. The one thing about the Catholic schools is we can't wait or hope for things to happen. We've got to go out and make it happen. And I think the schools did their best to encourage the families to send their kids back to school and receive word that the kids wanted to come to school. So it was good. It was good. I've gotten some very positive reports from the schools.
So kind of went off without a hitch. What was you guys' scheduling like? So with the public, they had a day 1 and a day 2. Was everybody in the private school side back to school yesterday?
With the exception of the high schools, and one elementary school that's only starting a few grades and then will eventually get up to all the students. But what we're scheduling is that all the students are coming to school every day. Again, at the high schools, they're on alternating schedules. 2 of them have online classes until February, but at one of them, they're coming on alternate days. But for the most part, especially at the elementary schools where it's pretty critical, kids are coming every single day.
Doc, so when you guys sent out the surveys and you got the responses and we had the first days of school, are there any other parents who maybe are now having second thoughts about sending the kids back to school and maybe want to just jump on the face-to-face? Is there a waiting list? How's that working with you guys?
Well, I think if the parents initially on the surveys, if they initially said they weren't coming, what we did was we set up a system for them to have to continue online learning, like synchronous live streaming of the classes, things like that. So those students were not disenrolled. They were still part of the school communities. I'm hoping that when parents see after the first couple of weeks that things are safe, that we did pay attention to health and safety, then I think they're going to bring their kids on. Now, that doesn't mean we've done everything we've wanted to do, because several weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago, we started the procurement process through DOE for sneeze guards for elementary schools and HEPA filters. And we're still waiting for those to come through.
Let me ask you about that because when we asked Superintendent Fernandez about it, he says it's tied up in procurement. Is that a satisfying? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's not because you don't have the stuff. But just what do you make of that, and how frustrating is it?
It's pretty frustrating. If the federal programs office called me right now and said, "Hey, your report that was due yesterday is due. When are you going to get it?" I will stay up all night to get it done. And Chris, I got to tell you that in the Catholic schools, many of those teachers and principals lost sleep to prepare for school. Many custodians spent the weekend in the schools to make sure everything was ready. Nobody sat around waiting until it was convenient to do things. So it's frustrating for me. And I'm sorry to say this publicly, but it's frustrating when the superintendent continues to say it's the procurement process. I've heard from vendors themselves that as soon as they get the word, they're calling their suppliers and things are going to get sent out. So, the notion that they're going to wait from August to January for those water dispensers, I'm not sure I understand that, because some of our schools got those things on their own and were able to procure them. They spent their own money procuring them because they did not want to wait. And that's what's happened to some of our schools. If they had the funds, they went out and bought sneeze guards. They went out and bought filters for themselves, for their schools, because their families asked for them. So using the procurement process as an excuse is something that continues to bother me.
Well, tell us what you really think.
If you really want, I'll go off the air. But not with BJ Cruz listening to what I have to say.
Right. Juan, I mean, obviously there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve, some growing pains, maybe with the first week of the return to face, but what's the next step for the private schools?
I think one of the most important things right now, Chris, there are two things that I just want to mention. One is academically, the schools are always going to be in the process of trying to figure out where we have to go from now until May to get kids to get ready for the next year. Because I think the one thing that frustrates teachers is the kids are not going to learn enough so that next year's teachers won't say, "Hey, that third grade teacher didn't do her job. The kids are not ready for the fourth grade," because the teachers know that we've got to do catch up. And the principals know that. So we're going to try to maximize class time, maximize the days of instruction, so that the students really will get as much out of this year as they can and not impede their learning process. And the second item is, like John, we're waiting for the efforts of GRMC and AMC to get approval for a process that they initiated. I first heard of it last week. And we just over the weekend got all the schools to provide the names and the villages of all the faculty and staff, so that when the clinics were ready to provide the vaccinations, we'd have all the information. Yesterday at this meeting we were a little disappointed to hear no decision has been made about the approval for those vaccinations for faculty and staff. So that's one of the first next steps we're looking for. But really the long-term plan for the rest of the semester is get our kids in as often as possible, as effectively as possible, and get them to get a good education for the rest of the year.
Well, thank you, Juan. Yeah, we'll definitely we'll keep eyes on this situation with vaccination of public and private school teachers and staff, because I mean, judging from the conversations we had last week, this was something that people were saying was likely to get done before we return to face-to-face instruction. And this whole vaccination effort, they bit off more than they could chew. And I just hope that we see a resolution to this soon. But yesterday.
I just want to mention, though, Chris, that I went for my vaccination on Friday, because I know you don't believe this, but I'm over 60.
I can't.
But I went for my vaccination, and I kept these numbers. I checked in at 1:38, and I left at 2:06. This was in Interahan.
Wow.
And the people couldn't have been nicer. It was great. I think the only thing I did wrong that day was I stopped at the EPEN mobile station and got some ice cream, and I'm not sure if that just offset the vaccination, but it was a nice afternoon going down in Iran.
Well, thank you for shouting out my village's mobile. They got the best soft serve on island. Thank you, Dr. Juan. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yep. And you did nothing wrong. I mean, when you're in EPAN, if you don't stop and get ice cream, then that's something wrong.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
We'll see you, Juan Flores Catholic School Superintendent. Let's stay right in the Zoom room where I know he's got a 10 a.m. Zoom on some procurement.